This is my channel, The Fancy Hat Lady Reads. I'm wearing one of my fancy Booktube hats, and today I'm finally gathering myself together to film at least a first part to my May wrap-up. I'm gonna try to get through at least the first 5 books I read in May in this wrap-up. Some of them my memory has gotten a bit fuzzy on, so I guess my apologies for that, but hopefully that'll help me get through this pretty quickly. The first book I finished in May I had started the previous month, and that was the 5th season by Jemisin. I think at this point my thoughts on the 5th season are shaded by the fact that I've now read the second book in this series, The Obelisk Gate, as well. But I think the first book is a little more exciting to talk about just because it lays so much extensive groundwork for the series. There is so much that is established in this first book, even if we don't get a lot of explanations for any of it yet. This book has been reviewed all over Booktube, so I don't know how much I can really contribute to that discussion that will be new, but this book takes place in a world called the Stillness that has a single Pangea-like continent that's very geologically unstable. As a result, this world is prone to dramatic seismic events, and sometimes those events cause the world, are bad enough that they cause the world to be relatively uninhabitable for periods of time, called seasons. And this is a world where seasons happen, like, historically speaking, every couple hundred years or so, and both humanity and the natural world have adapted to survive seasons that can last several years. In addition, this book focuses on origins, who are the people with magic in this world, although in the first book at least it's not thought of as magic per se, but origins have the power to control the earth, so they can cause seismic events and they can also quell them, and because of that they're extremely both valuable and dangerous in this society. There's an incredible amount of fear and prejudice towards origins, but imperial origins who are raised and trained at the fulcrum in the largest city of Humines to be valuable and useful are relied upon for the various services that they can provide. At the beginning of the book, we learn of an event that causes a season like no other, a season that will be a true end-of-the-world scenario. We then go on to follow 3 separate storylines, all following origins in this world, and these storylines all take place in different timelines. So what I would call perhaps the main storyline is Essun's storyline. This is the one that is famously told in second person, so you are Essun. I think that's part of what makes it kind of the main storyline. I might add that I had heard so much, both positive and negative, about the second-person storytelling technique that by the time I read this book it was sort of par for the course for me, and I didn't feel super strongly about it one way or the other. But Essun's storyline starts at the same time as this seismic event, this rift happens that causes this season. And at the time that happens, her husband has just learned that her children are origins, and he has killed their son and run away with her daughter. Another one of the storylines is Cyanite, who is a fulcrum origin who is sent on a mission of sorts with another man. And the third is Demaya, a young girl who is discovered to be an origin and is sent to the fulcrum for training. I would say that the majority of the big picture themes of this book are laid out really clearly in the prologue. The prologue is a really explosive, fascinating piece of writing, and I kind of love it. And then after that, it was almost a letdown to read 3 fairly normal fantasy storylines. But over the course of the book, those 3 storylines all illuminate the themes of the prologue. One of the things that struck me as really exciting about this book is that it looks at world building sort of on the planetary scale of what is, you know, the big picture, the continental-sized history of a planet. It looks at a history that spans long enough for continents to move, for species to go extinct or adapt, for civilizations to rise and fall and be forgotten to history. History is a really big theme in this book and in this series. One of the emphases is on how the society has chosen to neglect distant history. The theory being that any civilization that didn't survive was weak and does not deserve to be remembered because obviously they were doing it wrong. And this is a world that's full of remains from other civilizations, such as mysterious obelisks in the sky that you know are going to be important the minute they're mentioned, because you know the second book is called The Obelisk Gate. And this is where I think the story starts dabbling a bit into the territory of science fiction, even though the magical elements mean that it's pretty clearly rooted in fantasy as a genre. But there's a lot about how ways of living have been passed down and are considered unchallengeable. So there's a lot of really interesting, I guess, historiography type stuff in this book and this world. And then another big theme is various ways worlds can end, and how an end of the world is typically also a beginning of some sort. How there are lots of different sorts of ends of the world, both on a grand scale and on a personal scale. And how things do in fact go on afterwards. In terms of the actual 3 storylines, they're not that unusual fantasy storylines, especially considering that they focus on characters with unusual magical powers and so forth. I don't know how many people will guess the ways in which these 3 stories are connected before those reveals happen. I will say I saw one of the 2 connections coming a long way off, and the other I think refused to see until it happened, possibly because I didn't want it to be true and I was in denial. So having gushed so much about the 5th season now, I don't remember why exactly I gave it 4 stars instead of 5. It might be because so many questions were unanswered by the end of this book. There's so much in this world that's not even begun to be explained. I think now, having read the second book in the series as well, I have more of an appreciation for the groundwork that the first book was laying than I did at the time that I first finished it. And then the next book I read was one that I've mentioned recently on this channel because I'll be reading the 2nd volume in this series tomorrow for the Getting Graphic readathon. And this is The Girl from the Other Side, Volume 1 by Nagabe. It has, as I've mentioned before, a subtitle that's in Irish that I don't want to try to pronounce. This is a manga, and I picked it up on a whim from a recommendation list that I saw somewhere. And this was my first time reading manga. I don't necessarily think this is very typical for manga, but I really liked it. This has a kind of dark, whimsical fairy tale quality that I really loved, and I also really liked the art style, which sometimes gets very dark. This takes place in a world that's divided into the outside and the inside. The inside is where the humans live and try to stay safe, and the outside is where the outsiders live, who are supposed to be cursed, and people believe that this is a curse that can be passed on by touch. And in this haunting world, there is this little girl named Shiva, who for some reason is living in a cottage in the wood with this gentlemanly monster person who is one of the outsiders. She calls him teacher and he looks after her. And this volume is really just short and sweet, and the mystery at the heart of it is, why are these 2 living together? I really liked this because even though it's a sort of eerie, dangerous setting and world, and there's some intrigue going on that's just hinted at, I think the best of this is in these really quiet, sweet, intimate moments between these 2 characters. There's like this incredibly cute tea party that they have together, even though He doesn't eat or drink, he plays along for her benefit, and it's very heartwarming. And this one volume was so slim, just bite-sized, so I'm not gonna say that much more, only that I'm interested to see where this series goes. And the next thing I read was Wicked Wonders by Klages. This is a short story collection that I got a digital review copy of from NetGalley. I already have a review of this up. It's one of my double review videos. So I'll link that for you. I really liked this story collection, and I would urge you to check out that review. After trying to talk about the 5th season, everything else is just going lickety-split, isn't it? So the next thing I read was another library book that's gone back, and this was Norse Mythology by Neil Gaiman. This is basically just Neil Gaiman tells Norse mythology. I actually didn't really know any Norse mythology going into this, and I was curious to see how much would just seem familiar to me from various cultural references that I might have accumulated over the years. To be honest, not a ton of it was. I recognized more, I think, influences that other fantasy authors might have taken from Norse mythology than I recognized any of the particular stories. In particular, it struck me that Tolkien must have been inspired by Norse myth. You may know that I'm not the hugest fan of what I've read of Neil Gaiman so far. I'm never going to just gush about something just because he wrote the words. But if you're looking for a fairly concise, quick-to-read introduction to Norse mythology, this will do the trick. I didn't find the stories themselves to be particularly thrilling to me, though. I'm getting the sense that maybe Norse mythology won't end up being one of my favorite world mythologies. I think the world of the Norse myths and its moral ambiguity was more interesting to me than the stories and the characters themselves. But honestly, I'm not sure how much of that is the source material and how much of it is the way Neil Gaiman interpreted it. It is a very male-centric set of stories. There's a whole lot more emphasis on the male gods than the female gods. There was a note in the introduction where Gaiman points this out and mentions that the goddesses of Norse mythology seem to be fascinating, but we don't have a lot of stories about them, and that's possibly just because those stories aren't the ones that have made it down through us. We just don't have stories that are primarily about them that have been passed down to us through history. So I suppose we curse the failures of recorded history and it does no good. But yeah, I appreciated that he pointed that out. So that was Norse mythology for me. Ho-hum, I gave it 3 stars. I should mention that that was one I read because it was a group read for the Into the Forest Goodreads group that I'm a member of, and I like to participate in discussions on their group reads whenever I can squeeze them into my reading schedule. And then the last book I'm going to talk about in this portion of the wrap-up is going to be Monstress Volume 1 Awakening by Marjorie and Sana Takeda. This is a graphic novel. I picked it up because it was a nominee for the Booktube SFF Awards. And this is one that's going to be really hard for me to wrap up because I realized that there are a lot of things in this that were really good and really interesting. It wasn't for me. And if I had been planning on picking up the second volume at any point, I might have, in my mind, retained more of the details, the significant pertinent details than I did. As it is, I think I don't remember a lot of the specific plot stuff. And the plot stuff in this story is really pretty complex. Yes, the art style is totally gorgeous. That's kind of the only reason I really wanted to read this. Yeah, it's really good art. But this takes place in a really complicated fantasy world. I'd seen it sort of pitched as alternate matriarchal steampunk Asia, and I'm not sure that's quite right. There's maybe some vaguely steampunky stuff, but I wouldn't really call it steampunk. Nor would I really call it an alternate Asia. It's a separate secondary fantasy world that has a kind of East meets West vibe to it. And it does seem to have some science-y stuff. And yes, it is matriarchal. That was actually one of the things that I most appreciated about this book, that just sort of casually, without commenting on it, most of the characters who were in positions of authority were female. This is a world in which we understand there has been war and conflict between humans and the Arcanics. Humans are humans, we know what that is. The Arcanics are, as we eventually learn, a cross between humans and something else. They're not considered to be people by the humans. And they have a wide range of appearances, usually some sort of fusion between human and animal. Our main character, whose name I have forgotten, but she's an Arcanic with 100% human appearance. And she's got some sort of dark family history to do with her mother that she's trying to discover, and she's on a very dangerous mission of some sort. And what essentially happens in this volume is that there is something, it turns out, very dark and mysterious that has been lying dormant within her that is awakening, and it was terrifying. There are times when I'm reading something or watching something and I just hit this, like, nope moment. And for me, that's kind of what kept happening with this graphic novel. I just couldn't maintain my interest in the face of all of these sort of creepy, disturbing stuff. So yeah, there's a whole ton of exciting political intrigue and stuff that we're only seeing just the tiniest glimpse of in this first volume, but I don't think I'll be continuing on with the series, and for me personally, I could only give it 2 stars. Okay, so those were the first 5 things I read in the month of May. Let me know what you think, if you've read any of them, if you agree with me. If you disagree with me, it's okay to disagree with me. I know I have some, like, strong negative reactions to things that are, like, actually really good, but just not for me, like Monstress. Anyhow, I hope you're having a nice day. That is all. Bye for now.